Welcome, everyone, to the Executive Compass. This is where we get insights from executive firm founders. We'll dive deep into their story, how they got started, their challenges and opportunities, and how they're shaping their business for the future. For those of you joining this podcast, I'm Amisha Shumankar, founder of Vector Growth Partners, and we specialize in helping executive firms scale their revenue in 12 months or less. Today's guest is Larry Chisholm, founder and CEO of Quantus Management Resources. Hey, Larry, thank you so much for joining. How are you today?
Good. Thank you for having me.
Awesome. And where are you calling from?
Yes, so I'm calling from based about 30 miles west of Boston.
For our audience today on the call, Larry, would you mind doing a brief introduction?
Sure, yes. So basically, my name is Larry Chisholm, and I'm the founder and CEO of Quantus Management Resources. I've been in the recruiting space now for a little over 25 years, so I've seen some things here and there, but basically started out actually from my previous career, which was a retail management for a high-end clothier. And ironically, I was actually recruited by one of my clients to work for them. And they owned a boutique executive search firm south of Boston. And that's kind of how I got into recruiting. Since then, I've actually took my first, dive into entrepreneurship back in the early 2000s when I opened up basically a solo practice then and so forth. But for the most part, during my tenure, I specialized both in permanent placement as well as contract staffing. As far as industry spaces, I've had the benefit of recruiting a wide range of different verticals from healthcare to IT to engineering. You name it, I've had the opportunity to do some recruiting with it. But during that time, I've done, obviously a lot of work, both recruiting, both what I would call mid-tier professionals as well as C-suite. I work primarily with startups and SMBs, small businesses and such. And on occasion, I work with some large corporations as clients. But that's kind of what I'm doing. Since then, I've restarted, my practice back about 15 years now. And that's what I've been doing ever since.
What does a typical day look like for you?
Well, for the most part, again, being a business owner, in addition to obviously staffing and recruiting being my service, much of my day is balanced between basically business development and recruiting. So obviously, I'm always on the hunt for developing new relationships, new clients and such. And of those clients I've either developed or are currently serving, obviously the other part of my day really is trying to identify quality individuals that may fit their needs depending what projects or tasks that they're currently working on. And that's kind of really the balance of my day, and anything else that kind of falls in between, which can typically be a lot.
Yeah. And is there any season which is more intense compared to other times of the year? What's your take on that?
Yes. So basically, I mean, obviously in many business trends, you're going to have some parts of the year that are obviously more active than others. The best way I can really answer that question is in part kind of what I shared in my initial comments. Because of my experience and exposure to working a variety of different industry spaces, during that time I've had the benefit of being able to kind of not necessarily be caught up in downward trends or upward trends. I should say downward trends, because obviously where some industries may fall into some turbulence, if you will, other industries may be kind of hot and kind of heading up. So in that capacity, it's allowed me to kind of transition a bit easier. Yes, I mean, of course, you're going to have companies like right now, IT is probably experiencing more turbulence than it's been, in years past and such. And then, of course, with the introduction of AI and so forth, that's had a good deal of impact on a lot of different industries. COVID, most notably, obviously, has had a huge impact on a lot of companies, especially those that are very service-oriented, dealing with customer direct contact. Retail, obviously, is a big area. Restaurant business is also an area. So I've had the benefit, knock on wood, where it is, to be able to negotiate and navigate through that.
Yeah, no, that's great. And what would you say are the top three industries that are emerging as we go into 2026, that are very hot and you see a lot of movement there and, a lot of activity?
Well, as of late, I mean, obviously, and this just in my opinion, I've been doing a lot of work in the biopharma area. That's definitely an area of a particular note, biopharmaceutical and so forth. Healthcare, I think, is also another area to kind of look out for as well. As far as maybe the third vertical promoted, like what's been a lot of activity and where I see 2026 and beyond moving towards.
Yeah, no, very interesting. And I'd love to know, what is QMR's specialty Where have you been able to successfully fill the gap where other recruiting executive firms haven't been quite able to do that? Like, is there a specialty? And I know you serve many industries, but where was the gap that you noticed that, like, okay, this is where we can problem solve and emerge as strong contenders?
Okay. Well, I guess, and no different than many other firms. I mean, again, a lot of the activity that we have is contingent upon, I say, influenced by the type of services that we provide. So, for example, right now, a lot of what's been going on in terms of both discussion as well as companies like mine reevaluating has been the distinction between contingent services and retained services. And so that's kind of an evolution that I guess many of us, myself included, are going through. So when you talk about, what are some hot areas or particular verticals that have been of note or interest to me, quite frankly, some of them have kind of emerged in spaces that I have traditionally have done some work in, but have really taken a close look as it relates to kind of considering whether or not shifting my service orientation is something that I'm kind of committed to moving forward, meaning contingent and retain. So one vertical, specifically to be example, is the legal field. It's particularly AM Law 100 firms. These are typically the top 100 firms, across the country and have largely a global footprint. That's a particular target space that I've been working with, more so in collaboration with colleagues and partners in the field, because again, part of my business activity is networking through affiliated partners and professionals that are also doing what I do and such. But a lot of that has been through the introduction of working in those kind of shared projects. Again, another area that I'm looking at is, again, the biopharma area. That again is a different kind of a customized approach I need to kind of take a look at in terms of how I'm going to pursue that area. But again, it's definitely an area that's of a particular interest to me. For the most part, I would say right now with QMR where we're at, I guess timing's everything. You caught us in a space where I'm looking at really kind of not necessarily reinventing, because I think that's too extreme a word, but really taking a look at my practice, how I've ran it over the years, and maybe considering a different approach from 2026 and beyond. A lot of that will include really contingent versus retain. So to give you a specific example, retain. It's an area where, to be candid, not everybody can do in my field. It's no critique or anything on skill sets, but it does require a certain type of both expertise as well as ability to really reach out and partner with your clients or prospective clients. Because with that, there are skill sets that you're employing that go, I don't want to say beyond recruiting, but in many ways you are diving into the DNA, if you will, of businesses, their operations, what are their aches and pains, things that may not necessarily on the surface directly relate to talent acquisition and recruiting, but it does ultimately, when you look at trying to identify professionals and individuals to bring into those organizations, you need to have an appreciation to in terms of how they run and what are their challenges, both internal and external. So when you identify talent, these are individuals that not only obviously come with the technical skills that my clients are looking for, but also from an intangible aspect, they have both the professional and headspace to be able to acclimate to their particular type of business and workspace.
That's
I
wonderful.
throw a lot at you, but
Me.
does that answer your question?
No, I love it. I was just going to have you expand on that piece, what you just spoke about. Are you telling me that when you are fulfilling talent acquisition for your clients and you're not only ensuring that they
Yes.
fill the technical capabilities, they have to be maybe a cultural fit also in that organization wherever they're going?
Yes,
And
yes.
yeah.
Yes, yeah, that's true, because again, I don't want to get too much into the psychology of it, but it is a metric. It is a tangible element that you want to factor into any search. And when you're talking about retain, even more so than probably traditional contingent, where I mean, I guess you're kind of filling in open roles, and yes, it's important that you identify people that are qualified and so forth. So you're not diminishing that quality, but in
Sure.
retain, you are taking a step further, because in order to develop a true partnership, part of that is understanding who your partner is. And sometimes it may go beyond what it is service that you're providing to them. So in my case, it's talent acquisition. But in order for me to really do that at a level that meets their particular need, I need to understand their business from the inside out. I need to understand, what are the challenges they're having. So a great example of that is in my tenure, I have done a lot of work with startups and SMBs, but emphasis on startups because these are companies that are obviously newly emerging. They're bombarded with a lot pressures and priorities. I mean, obviously, there's the initial priority of just establishing their operation, getting up and running. There's priorities from investors who are looking for a return on their investment. There's challenges in terms of the industry space that they're operating in, and obviously being able to compete and creating a niche or a brand that they're recognized for. So all these different things, in addition to the growing pains that comes with building a business. So when you're identifying talent, you want to make sure that you identify someone that obviously meets the technical skills, but also has an appreciation for the environment or the weather that they're going to. I like to use the term, some days, you may need an umbrella. Other days you may need, swim trunks. The other days you may need an overcoat, for the winter. So the weather changes that much, but you're getting into aspects where essentially you can have two people that on paper may, be very comparable in terms of technical skill sets, but then when you put a stopwatch next to one and the other, both of them, one of them you may freeze up like a deer in the headlights, whereas the other one kind of, grabs onto like a dry sponge to water. And so that's a simple example, but I think you can appreciate in terms of the different dynamics that you need to factor in. And so that all I view is part of developing a fruitful and obviously equitable and mutually beneficial retained partnership with any particular potential clients. And my experience to date, I feel both from life experience, because I think it's a small part of it as well, but also just, technical experience, I'm at that level that I can have those kinds of conversations.
And how do you ensure that when you get into that partnership with the client, that the talent that you bring fills both those roles? Like they're comfortable
I'm
in
going
the
to have to
environment.
repeat that again. So how do I ensure, but just elaborate on that again, please? Yeah, thank you.
Yes. How are you measuring those metrics that you're placing somebody who's not just technically skilled, but is also able to weather any environment wherever, in the organization that they work for?
Sure. Part of it, again, is in the initial screening process, of course, you're going to have, standard, I guess, screening questions, if you will, to kind of really delve into the individual's background. But it's within those particular screening questions, primarily open-ended, that you really begin to kind of get a sense of, what kinds of projects have they been engaged in, the level of complexity. My kind of litmus test, if you will, is their ability to kind of, walk me through almost like a tour through particular projects that they've been engaged in. The more complex, the better, because I need to get an appreciation of how they're able to both apply their knowledge and their skills, especially in an environment where there are competing priorities. And so as they kind of describe those different ventures and tasks and projects that they've been engaged in, one, obviously, it allows me to develop a sense of, obviously, their ability, both from a knowledge standpoint, but also their ability on how to apply that knowledge under less than ideal circumstances. So when I talk with my clients, or as I understand my clients, I'm hearing that, I'm saying, well, what am I hearing that really chimes in with my particular client that I'm working with that I feel that definitely is worth a conversation? And so, again, I'm mentioning a lot of human elements here because, yes, there are metrics, but metrics don't tell the whole story. I have great metrics, and they can almost tell you, not enough of the picture to really understand if is this the right person or not. And so sometimes, if they can give me kind of, I guess, as close to real-time scenarios or projects that they've been engaged in, that gives me a sense of, okay, yes, I can see that this person understands the potential weather they could be going to because they've been in similar situations. So when I make that introduction, it's with a degree of confidence that I know that this person can carry that level of conversation with my clients. So it's less of a, okay, yes, I want to know what you do and what you've done, and more of kind of almost a light strategy session. Well, them delving into, okay, what are some of the challenges you've met, and maybe comparison contrast of similar, topics or obstacles that they have dealt with that that they can kind of touch on until obviously something more formal is arranged. I hope that answers your question.
Yes, it does. It does. So I want to know if you look at your funnel from first touch to signed client, like where do you feel the biggest drop off happens on both ends, like talent as well as companies that want to work with you? How long does it take from start to?
So in the kind of placements that I'm dealing with, you could be looking at anywhere from, let's say, as little as 45 days, which is kind of fast track quite frankly, to unless it's a contract position where that it's a little bit quicker than that. But in terms of from a permanent placement standpoint, you're looking at minimum 45 days, and that's fast track to realistically anywhere from 60 to up to 90 days, depending on both the uniqueness of the position, if it's a non-managerial role, or obviously if it's a managerial role, depending on the seniority, whether it's a director, VP, or thereabouts.
Got it. And my second part to that question is, where do you feel that the biggest drop-off usually happens in the process?
The biggest drop-off?
Yeah.
Yes. I mean, in recruiting, you have a lot of different variables. So although you're focusing on the qualifications and skill sets of the individual that you're talking about, timing, those kinds of things, there are other factors that may play a role that are less controlling. So, for example, it could be on the client side where what is their level of urgency? I mean, obviously the presumption is that if they have you working on it, there's some degree of urgency, but urgencies change. It's just the nature of business. What is a urgent priority can become less urgent if other factors come into the equation. And then on the candidate side, it depends on whether or not they are actively looking. Have I caught them in a time where they're not looking, but they're what I would call, or what is typically called a passive candidate, someone that's not looking but is always open to new opportunities. There could be other factors that may influence their motivation. It could be personal, family. It could be financial. It depends on other variables and such. Typically, obviously, in the screening process, if there's level of interest, the hope is that you've at least sussed out much of that, so there's very few surprises in terms of what may be factors that may come into the equation that might influence either the placement itself or anything, I guess, having a negative impact on that. Obviously, once they're in the job, the key thing is from a service provider standpoint is maintaining communication both with the client and the candidate, making sure that where you kind of left them off in the starting point, that there has been no changes in the context of where it could be a concern either on the client side or the candidate side. So again, that's just really reaffirming that the research that you've done, the qualifications that you've done in terms of screening the applicant, understanding your client and what's going on in their world, that there hasn't been much of a change. So that way over the next, let's say 30, 60, 90 days, maybe up to a year, depending on the seniority of the position, that for the most part, the behavior between all concerned is operating in a capacity that is predictable and not unexpected from a positive standpoint.
Okay. Thank you. When you think about the next 12 months, like say the new year's coming, of course, where do you think technology, including AI, could have the biggest impact on how you run the business?
Yeah, so I'll answer that in this context. I mentioned earlier in my comments, obviously how long I've been in the business and such. And so what I'll do is I kind of use that as a starting point and kind of come to current events in terms of AI, because I think there's relevance here. So when I first got into the business, I hate to say it, but the internet as we know it was still relatively new. But what we're talking about is obviously the value proposition to your client. So obviously it changed the landscape in terms of how recruiters like myself presented ourselves to prospective clients and the value proposition that we had towards them at that time. And then later on, social media came into the equation. And again, changed the dynamic and the value proposition of how we provide our service during those times. Now with AI, we are, going through what I would call the term that I would use kind of the Wild West period. It's still in its infancy stage, so there's a lot of progress that needs to be made. That being said, I want to say, at least overtly, that I've always been a proponent of advances, technologically and so far. I don't think, inherently there's anything bad to it, but I also put it under the label of any product. It's only as good as the quality that goes into it. So, and that's the case with everything else. So with AI, yes, I believe AI is inevitable. And so it's here, fine. So let's try to identify ways in which we can improve it. Continuous improvement. We're not anywhere near a finished product, clearly, because there are a lot of companies out there that have a very good product, and there are companies out there that claim to have a good product, but it's not very good. And then everything else is kind of in between. But as recruiters, I think we find ourselves in a unique situation because we're, in many ways, in the front lines of how this is deployed. And I can tell you just from experience as well as just observation and conversations with my colleagues that when you're looking at AI and its impact on our ability to be efficient, that's one of the key areas in terms of how it can impact, our world. And every even just this morning there was a report in terms of just the impact of AI as it relates to the jobs market and such. And the irony is that although the revenue and companies and so forth that seem to be doing financially pretty well, it's not reflective in terms of hiring. In fact, it's the other side. It's how AI has obviously impacted from an efficiency standpoint. I hate to say it, but minimizing jobs that are not needed, and jobs from a very basic standpoint are probably the highest single expense of any company in terms of payroll. And so when
Yes.
you cut payroll, yes, you have an enormous savings, and yes, on a balance sheet it may look impressive or attractive, but there's obviously a consequence to that in terms of job loss. So getting back to one of the things that I feel on a pros side is that it's definitely great in terms of helping recruiters like myself become more efficient at juggling multiple priorities, because that is very a very real tangible benefit that comes with having AI as part of the process. On the other side, the challenge there is basically that sometimes, again, with the continuous improvement, there may be things that may fall through the cracks. So I'll give you a very basic but simple example that I think is relevant to
Please.
this. So some years ago, I can recall, again, just on a day-to-day, screening resumes, and you come across resumes, good and bad, and so forth. And there was, a few resumes, or one in particular that I saw that was just really terrible. And I was just curious. I'm like, who would put their resume out there that they have to knowingly think that no one's going to look at it? Like, won't
Right.
expose himself that way. So I was just curious. I had some time in my hands, so I called this person up. And ironically, I got him on the phone, and we were talking, and I was actually doing a search for a particular client of mine for a particular job, and it was an engineering job to be exact. And so I'm talking to this person, and as the conversation keeps going on, I'm realizing that I'm not talking to an idiot. So I'm thinking, okay, so what's the problem here? I'm looking at this terrible resume, but I'm talking to this person that I can't wait to present to my client. And it
Sure.
occurred to me that the reason why their resume is so terrible is because they're too busy doing the job, getting it done, meeting their responsibilities and such. So
Sure.
long and short of, I helped them obviously come up with something better, for, at least from an appearance standpoint, and I got them placed with my client. But I want to use that example because it's an extreme one, but I think it's very relevant, where the human element myself, I took a chance, a random situation where I got someone, I saw something, I followed through, and this is someone that was a major benefit to one of my clients at the time. But if I had not taken that initiative, then that's a lost element that that client or anyone else probably wouldn't be able to benefit from because of a certain aspect. So I translate that to, let's say, keyword search. If a person's resume doesn't fall within a certain keyword search algorithm, they're not even looked at, let alone considered. And so how many qualified applicants have been turned away with not so much as even a 5-minute phone screen or something to determine if this is someone that's worth considering because they don't fall within the keyword search, or something along those lines. But again, I think you see the comparison that I'm relating to. So that's where the continuous progress of AI needs to continue on. So again, hopefully those different examples can give you kind of some comparison contrast of both where obviously it can make an impact and has made an impact, but also where there's still further development and continuous improvement needed.
Yeah, no, totally. And I love that you said that you are using some AI in your company, and you said a couple of things. I'd love to know, what are those specific examples and how you use it on a day to day?
Yeah, so I mean, the most basic example is with my ATS system, applicant tracking systems, because obviously, again, being in business, it's important to be able to manage both client activity, candidate activity, job board activity efficiently. And yes, I mean, AI has definitely been beneficial in that capacity in terms of managing my day, being more efficient, and so forth. Another area that has been really impactful is in the screening process, because when I first again got into the business, I mean, obviously there were different ways of of screening people and so forth and all that. But I mentioned to you that again, that I've had the benefit and still do recruit for a lot of different spaces, but that doesn't necessarily mean I'm an expert. It's like it's like I know how to drive a car, but I can't build an engine for you, kind of thing. But that being said, I still have clients that have needs. So what AI has allowed me to do is be able to develop customized screening questions that are specific to an individual's background. So, for example, if I'm, let's say interviewing a director of emergency care for a hospital, although I've never done that job myself, I can both appreciate and understand, well, what could be some of the demands of that, and I use AI to come up with specific customized screening questions. So when I ask that individual, tell me or give me examples of how you are able to manage competing priorities in a triage situation. And then that way, it both gives me this understanding, both the scope and the level of expertise they have in their field. But on the other side, I'm able to present to my client with credibility that, hey, here's someone that I think is worth your time seriously taking a closer look at and having a conversation with.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. I'd love to know what's working well for you right now and what's been frustrating.
Well, I guess, going over some of, what I mentioned a moment ago, again, being able to screen effectively, both within any industry vertical and to be able to present, those results to my clients with credibility. So that, I think that's critical because that not only goes into building a strong relationship with your client, but also it goes into both the quality of the placements that you make and the viability of whether the placement will survive. So that goes right to the heart of quality control, is how effective are you at screening and identifying what your candidates are able to do if they're able to meet your client's needs. So that's definitely an area that's been working very well for me. It's also an area that will play a significant role in what I mentioned to you earlier in terms of my deliberation and considering kind of, taking my practice in a different direction. Because again, it's not that I'm going into a different space or industry vertical. It's I'm taking my service approach and coming at it from a different angle. And so rather than, an approach that's more consistent with, trying to capture contingent service jobs, retain, obviously, it's going to require a bit more work. It's going to require a little more research, understanding my companies a little bit better. So when I'm having those introductory conversations, I'm able to share with them, what I've learned about their company, the industry space that they operate under. So from there, it's kind of a starting point. And then once I kind of, am able to get their attention there, then I can kind of, weed back to my area of expertise, which is obviously talent acquisition, and how those two merging and how I can help them identify their needs in trying to find the right people, how I can be a part of their team in that sense and really develop a true partnership.
Sure. And did you mean that you specifically think saying outbound is where you're focused on right now, and that is something that you're experimenting with, outbound efforts, like connecting with companies where you want to work with them and they see you as the right partner for talent acquisition?
Yes. Because again, it's me again taking advantage of actually the technological resources that were not as prevalent early in my career, but also now and quite frankly, given my experience in the field and understanding and just how I look at both our industry and just I guess the economy from a strategic standpoint, I can have those kinds of conversations, but also the technology allows me to both prepare for that with greater ease because the research is definitely it allows me to gather information quicker, faster, and even much more in depth than maybe in previous times where I have to do a little bit more work. It may take a little bit longer. I may have to find creative ways to identify information, whereas with AI and the technological resources that we have available now, I'm able to do that in a much quicker time frame. And at least, from there, I can escalate the conversation from that point.
Yes. So it sounds like doing the research, having those numbers and having that information at your fingertips, and then going ahead and making that first contact with the interested party is what you're saying. So definitely boosting your outbound efforts and help with AI. That has really helped, which I think has helped a lot of us. No, you're absolutely right. Great. And I'd love to know, Larry, what metrics are you most focused on improving? It could be one, it could be more than one as we go into 2026.
So, and that's an excellent question because traditionally in my line of work, metrics is everything. The cost per hire, obviously time to hire, number of hires, those kinds of things. Definitely key indicators in terms of how well you're doing or if you need to adjust what you're doing. Because of the approach that I'm looking at in terms of transitioning my business from less contingent to more retained, those metrics obviously will be influenced a bit. So it's almost kind of taking a bit more of a qualitative approach as opposed to quantitative, because although I don't want to wean off my contingent, the retain, both from a revenue and monetary standpoint, there are benefits to that. A contingent, in many ways, again, it is relative to obviously the quality of work that you're able to bring to bear, but there's so many other factors too, and it's difficult to kind of set yourself apart. It's not to say that yes, I mean I'll match myself to any recruit out there in terms of trying to identify good people and place them, but in a retained relationship, it's a different type of a skill set. In addition to obviously trying to identify the right people and such, because it's much more intimate, it's much more personal. And with those kinds of conversations, like I said, not everyone can have that. And also, too, I think what's important to kind of note is that, and I mentioned this to a number of people, even recently, that, again, in any line of work, you know what you know, and you only bring what you know to the work that you do. So when I first got into the business, like I said, technology, as we know it, was just starting to come and emerge and play a part of our everyday activity. But over time, I've been able to successfully adapt and transition as technology continued making changes and evolutions and increases and enhances to the way we do things. But you have a generation of recruiters that have come into the business with certain resources, just this is standard and this is how we do things. And it's not to their discredit, but it is to some degree a limitation. And so the challenge that they may have is an openness to different ways of doing things that may not necessarily be technology based, but do play a lot in terms of being able to present that type of qualitative effect or impact that companies are looking for. So when you swing that over to retain, this is what I mean by developing and establishing those relationships. Yes, research is important, getting the data, getting the information, because you want to be able to present that as well. But after you present the numbers is, okay, so how are you able to understand that and configure it in a way that makes sense in my world, and how you're able to provide your services that can make my world a little easier. And that's where coming in and understanding different aspects of how businesses run, what are particular challenges that they're being faced with, and just really connecting with the person you talk to individually. What have been their challenges? What have they seen? Sharing their experiences and all that. So there's a lot of intangibles in there that go to us having those kinds of conversations that create partnerships, that create that type of relationship. If you were to ask me 15 years ago, from this point, could I be able to hold those conversations? Probably not as much. I mean, yes, I was a smart guy then, but again, you can only speak to what you know, and someone on the other end, they can tell if they're talking to somebody that can relate to them or not, just simply by, again, these kinds of topics and issues that may come up during the course of a conversation.
Excellent. I'd love to know, when you think about the next 6 to 12 months, is your bigger lever winning new client relationships, or is it going deeper with the ones you already have?
Okay, I'm going to have you repeat that again. I heard you, but it's a little low in the volume. I'm sorry, repeat that. I'm sorry.
So when you think about the next 6 to 12 months, is your bigger lever winning new client relationships, or going deeper with the ones you already have?
Actually, that's a great question. It's a combination of both, really. I mean, because you don't want to, you work so hard for clients that you do have, you don't want to diminish them. You want to obviously identify those clients, and you know them, anyone know them based on your prior work relationship, if they're some that are ready for a deeper relationship, because it's contingent upon really the kind of work that you've done for them. So, for example, there's one client that I'm working with right now on a rather difficult assignment and such, but they're in a place where I can see that 2026 that I can introduce this different concept of how to graduate or evolve our relationship because of both the quality of work that I presented to them during our tenure, and because of the relationship that I have with them, that I can see them, I can see the level of trust. And I think maybe that's a key word, trust, and going to that next level, because they've worked with me, they've seen what I produce for them, and so now I don't think it's unreasonable to say, hey, listen, if you have a few moments, there's a different type of conversation I want to have with you about some things either that I've noticed. I mean, you always want to start on something that you think that you've identified that could be an area that you can kind of further your work on and consider that kind of your test ground, if you will. And that's with your current existing clients. With the new ones, yes, obviously, with the new ones, you don't have any prior relationship, but again, it's all about, introductions, your first impressions. So again, the relationship in terms of the research, how you utilize that research, how you present yourself, what you're able to present in terms of past accomplishments, maybe even references for that matter, if it's necessary to establish those kinds of new relationships. So my priorities are both. It's in that capacity, but it's everything is contingent upon how I am able to transition my service approach to this going this direction. Because ultimately, I think that's really the future of where I want to take my company. Yes, there's always going to be some amount of contingent business, but I want to increase. I should say, change the percentage so it's more going like this, and where retain is more my kind of activity as opposed to contingent. Because again, I don't, to kind of use a term, you don't want all your eggs in one basket. So it's kind of a delicate balance. I always want to keep a variety of clients available, because again, some clients gonna hit some times where they're not gonna have much activity for you, and others may have more, and then there are just circumstances that may come up where companies may go out of business. I've had that happen in the past. So you always want to keep a variety of clients available to you. But in the same token, with me, my challenge is to be able to graduate those that I can to the retain side, and then continue to obviously identify and search new relationships, but start off as retained.
Got it. And I should have maybe asked this a little earlier, but retained is, I'm thinking, a long-term position, more at the senior level. It's not. Explain to me what the difference between both is.
Actually, no. I'm glad you asked it, because it's you don't want to it's so easy to get involved in topics and presume, oh yeah, you must know what I'm talking about, right? But no. So let me actually do it in this capacity. I think this way it explains it a bit clearer. So in the world of recruiting, just like in any profession, to anyone that's not in recruiting, we all look the same. A recruiter, yeah, they're all the same. But obviously, among recruiters, we see the distinctions. Some of it is specialities in terms of industry spaces. Some of it is in the type of recruiting, contingent versus retain. So in the world of recruiting, there's what they call temp recruiters. That's probably a term that's very popular, and those tend to be, what if I has temporary placement, tend to be more with junior level positions, a lot of manufacturing roles, things like that, general labor. And those tend to turn over pretty quickly. Assignments can be as little as a day to long-term assignments in that space could be 30 days. That's considered long-term and such. Whereas contract staffing, again, is kind of a cousin of temp placement. But again, you're not talking about permanent placement, but these assignments can be as little as maybe 60 or 90 days to as long as maybe 2 years. I've worked on contract assignments that have been that long. And they tend to be, again, more what I would call mid-level, maybe senior-level non-management roles, particular specialities and such. And then there's obviously headhunting permanent placement, which is a term that's very familiar, and that can go the whole gamut from junior level to mid to senior level, depending on what you're working on. And then there's retain. Retain is considered what I would call the most senior level, because it's the relationship is much more consultative. You're not coming in filling in a blank or an open space. You're coming in diagnosing a situation, and that definitely involves a high level conversation. Now, in retain, that is primarily utilized with, again, it's not excluded to managerial roles. It can be, again, unique non-managerial positions. It could be unique, maybe scientific positions or thereabouts, and so forth. But again, in that particular area, it's a hard to find position. It may be a position that's tailor-made or customized to a particular company, where maybe they don't have a generic title that like a software developer, where you put that up and you're going to get a whole barrage of different resumes, because it's a very general term. It can be exclusive. So retain is really something that is typically limited to either certain unique special assignments, but it's also more lean towards, again, the relationships that one or a firm may have that are obviously a bit more intimate, a bit more closer in partnership. So that way, because there's a level of trust there, they're coming in and saying, hey, I know you can give me the numbers, but now I need your special skills to really dig deeper beneath the surface and help me identify the right person for this particular job that will be obviously a huge impact in my business.
Thank you. Thank you for clarifying that up.
That's kind of a long-winded answer, but hopefully it gives you a comprehensive. I want to provide as much context as possible.
Thank you. No, that helps. I'd love to go back to, your goals for the next year. And you said it's a bit of both. You are winning new client relationships as well as going deeper with the ones you currently have. How are you currently filling the top of your pipeline? Is it mostly referrals? Is it inbound content, outbound with AI and everything, which we have so much at our disposal? Or is it something else entirely?
Right. Well, I would say D, all the above. There's really nothing that's off the table, quite frankly. Referrals are obviously the best because they speak to work that you've already done, and a certain degree of credibility that goes behind that. So if you're able to get a referral, that's probably the best kind of situation because it's not a cold call or even in some cases necessarily a lukewarm call. It's there's someone's vouching for you in that capacity. So there's that. And then there are others that, again, depending on the nature of who you're going after, I mean, you can come across maybe niche focus. In my case, I'm not. But again, a lot of it is contingent upon the research that you do. Others of it is just quite straight out identifying, coming up with a list of targeted companies, like, for example, startups. I'll give you an example. Targeting companies that may have X number of employees or maybe a ceiling cap of, let's say, maybe 3 or 5 million in revenue, let's say 2 million, and targeting that. So I mean, it's very general, but it's kind of creating kind of a landscape of a potential clients that fall within these parameters, and then just going after that. But again, in the world, you don't exclude anything, but referrals are probably by far the best way to get in the door because typically, I won't say it's a guaranteed deal, but
Sure.
it's as guaranteed as you can get, contingent on other factors in terms of at least developing a new relationship and then building it from there.
Sure. And Larry, hypothetically, if you had a magic wand to fix one thing in the business right now that's either holding you back or slowing you down to get there, what would that one thing be?
I mean, if I had a magic wand, I'd just simply say, that everybody's business is doing great, so there's no reason to turn new services up. But obviously that's unrealistic. But no, if I were to say any, I would say that's kind of I guess it's kind of a hard one to because there's so many different factors that come into the equation, at least as I see it. But I would say simply being open to new information. Okay, and that's. I mean, it's kind of a generic concept, but there's actually a lot of relevancy to it because in my line, like I'll paint out a scenario to you that I often come across. So when I'm trying to identify, let's say, new prospects and new clients to develop relations with, it's really critical that I identify decision makers with authority, financial as well as anything else in terms of being able to, if they like what I'm presenting to them, that they can at least make the call on some level to at least get it started. And then obviously it's up to me to kind of escalate and help them, build from there. But encountering people, especially in the startup space, that are at least open to listening. Give me 5 minutes. Trust me. I know myself well enough that what I'm gonna say, you're either gonna fall asleep in the first 10 or 15 seconds, or you're gonna say, oh yeah, each time give me an opportunity to earn that extra minute and such. And I can't tell you how many times I come across people that I just automatically, just from reflex, and maybe because they get so many calls or get bombarded, and I understand that, and they just don't even want to listen. This is, you don't even know what I'm pitching you, is something that will make things easier for you. And I get it. You got to prioritize your time. You got to multitask and so forth. But I will say that from my experience, and I'll use startup as a great example, too many startups obviously don't succeed for a whole host of reasons. But in my view, one of the key reasons I think is identifying, and I kind of used as an example earlier, identifying talent that can function in a unstable work environment, which is startup. It's nothing against people that may come from big companies and all that, but these companies tend to be established. There's protocols, there's procedures, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 steps, on what to do and what not to do and so forth. And there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, the whole goal of startup is to turn chaos into order. But at some point, you need to survive the chaos in order to transition to order. And you need to identify people that can function in chaos and bring order to chaos. If you're not willing to listen to someone that may be able to make that that contribution to help you, to challenge that. It's not that you're bringing in people that may not be technically up to the job. You're bringing in people that may not be emotionally up to the job, and
Yeah.
so they get in and you realize, okay, well, why is this person failing? I'll use this perfect example. People confusing whether or not someone who, let's say, is a very technically adept person, let's say a mechanic, they put things together, they're able to create, and maybe build the best engines or whatever. And because of their performance, they get promoted into management. Well, management is an entirely different skill set. Maybe a manager of mechanics. Okay, well, you're great at the technical aspect, but how great are you at the people aspect, which has absolutely nothing to do with that. So, it's a very simplistic example, but it's a relevant example. So you take that mentality, that principle, and you employ it to an environment like startup, which is very chaotic in the beginning, okay, identifying someone that can take their skill, their knowledge, and employ it in the middle of a tornado or a hurricane, and then work their way out of that, and then bring some type of harmony to what's going on and such. That's probably maybe part of my argument to try and get in the door and make the case to companies. Again, is what I'm contributing will guarantee their success? Probably not. I will admit to that, but I definitely do admit and would say that it increases their chances if they can partner with someone that understands the chaos, of startups and what they go through. That's at least an important very first step. The rest is a matter, okay, how well can we kind of collaborate and bring together our resources to obviously navigate through these challenging times.
Well said. I love that.
So I guess to answer your question simplistically, be open to new information, be open to listening, even if it's only for 30 seconds or a minute. But that 30 seconds or minutes can make the difference in another minute, 5 minutes, and before you know it, a relationship that actually can have an impact, from a monetary standpoint to creating jobs, the whole 9 yards.
Totally. I'd love to know, what's one thing you could leave our audience, one key message or piece of advice? And I think it's kind of what you just said right now, but if there's anything else in regards to growing their recruitment business and continuing being successful.
I would say, and this is probably maybe more towards, it's to my colleagues alike, and this may be very similar because we all have scars and so forth, but to anyone that is considering, kind of from an entrepreneurial standpoint, looking into getting into staffing as a business and such, I would say if there's one piece of advice that I would say to you is important. Actually, it's going to be a couple of things. Be resilient, but always have a positive attitude. Because, and I don't say that to necessarily be idealistic, but you're going to have some bad days, guaranteed. It's going to happen. You're going to make mistakes. Get used to it. The key thing is learning from it, taking the constructive out of it, and then being able to apply what you've learned into hopefully minimizing and making better choices moving forward. And I think, and again, that goes to attitude and headspace. So, be resilient, and understand that, listen, it's okay, and there's another thing too that I want to share that I think is also important, and it isn't necessarily geared towards people that may want to get into the business, but it's just those that are in the business, whether you're looking to get into it or not. But I've gone through a lot of different situations where sometimes in trying to please a client, you're balancing between the desire to, submit a candidate and not submit a candidate. And what I mean by that is you're going to come across jobs that, quite frankly, may be virtually impossible to fill. It happens. Not that often, but you do come across a job where, maybe either the technical skills or what have you are just either not that much in demand or just difficult to find. And you're trying to obviously satisfy your client in identifying the right people, but you're balancing the credibility of, okay, listen, if I present them anyone, and that person fails, well, obviously I'm going to need to take the onus of that. But in doing so, was I being careless? Was I being maybe over presumptuous in saying, well, something, I'd rather err on the side of presenting them no candidate than presenting them bad candidates. Even if on some level they may be worth submitting, they just don't meet the standard that they need to meet in order to submit them with the degree of confidence that you want to share with them, because that really goes to the long-term trust and relationship that you ultimately want to build with any client. And so when I talk about revisiting those clients that I've developed those relationships with, and I'm looking at escalating them into a retained relationship, part of this is based on the level of trust that I've built with them. The submittals that I've built, with them, the kind of candidates that they've hired through me and that have been successful with them. So again, going back to knowing, is it better to just say, hey, listen, the client just kind of, tells you, you really disappointed me, you dropped the ball. I guess I'd rather receive that than them saying, well, why did you submit this when you probably knew that they weren't really the kind of candidate that I needed. I'd rather, err on the side of, I'm sorry, I wasn't able to deliver, rather than deliver what I feel is a substandard product. I mean, we have countless examples, that are situations that are in life, life impact or life threatening situations like cars, or machinery, things like that, where if they're not put together properly, lives could be at stake. Well, I won't necessarily say that recruiting has that impact, but on some level, the principle is the same. If you deliver someone that you feel is not entirely set up for success, both they for themselves and for your client, and you know that, then there are consequences. So knowing when and when not to submit, I think is something to really understand and embrace. And I think it's up to each of us to have our own discussion on how we handle that. But that's just something that I would throw out there for people to just consider and deliberate on.
Great. Thank you. Well said. Larry, where can our audience find you?
Yes. So in terms of contacting me, the best way to get a hold of me is either through qmrconsultants.com. That's my website. You'll have all my contact information, and there you'll have my direct line, my email, and so on. But I'm also on LinkedIn. Not aware there's a lot of Chisholms out there, CHISM, but if you put Larry L. Chisholm on LinkedIn, I'll come up somewhere, or Quantus Management Resources, either or. You can reach me through there, and I'd love to have a conversation with you.
Perfect. Thank you so much. This has been a conversation and so many rich insights and where the industry is going, where your business is going. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it. I enjoyed myself.